Great, very warm welcome everybody to this, the latest Agilicis webinar. Hope you're all doing well out there. We'll just give a moment or two for others to get in via the lobby and get into the meeting. But hopefully many of you will have joined us for previous webinars that we have run and therefore will be familiar with the sort of dynamic that we're looking for here, which is one of participation and involvement. So as we go through some of the material this afternoon, actually we want this to be quite discursive, because I think this is not so much an area of the safe system that people will understand well, and we need a kind of didactic explanation of. This is very much a sort of novel area of exploration that we've been trying to push forward in over the last few years, and really interested in people's engagement around the topics that we're discussing. You might have perspectives to bring from your own areas of experience, your own organizations. So please do join in with the conversation. Feel free to engage with one another in the chat. And if you've got specific questions that you would like to raise for us as we go through this afternoon session, then use the Q&A button as well. As ever, we are superbly supported by our colleague Steve Ferris, who will be sort of just making sure in the background that things are running. So if you've got technical issues and that sort of thing, then he'll probably tell you to turn it off and turn it back on again, because that's always what works, isn't it? But at least he's sort of there to try and corral things. So welcome to this session on an introduction to safe system culture. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Dan Campsall. I'm the chair of Agilicis and have spent the last 2 decades working in road safety, wear a variety of other hats as well, also vice chair at the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety here in the UK, because I know we're joined by some international colleagues as well today, and delighted to be joined by my long-term colleague Tanya, who'll introduce herself.
Sure. So I'm Tanya Fosdick, Research Director at Agilicis, and like Dan, been in this game for about 20 years.
Yeah, I know, right? We get you get less long sentences for serious crimes, but anyway, we're here and we're here to talk about safe system culture. And as I was just intimating, I think this is an area that is relatively novel. I think for many of us who've been working in road safety, the sort of constructs, principles and practice of safe system is something that we've been growing in familiarity with for 20 odd years, as the sort of global consensus around the safe system has been developing since early work on performance management frameworks and the development of thinking around safe system and its increasing prevalence within the global road safety literature. But I think one of the things that we've seen in more recent times is organizations who grappling with safe system then going, hang on a minute, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. So Tanya, I wonder whether I just sort of lob that as a bit of a question to you at the moment, because you've done a lot of work at national and subnational level thinking about sort of safe system strategy and that sort of thing. What are some of the things that we're starting to sort of show as the challenges, the cracks, the pain points that got us thinking about this whole issue of culture?
So I was reflecting on this earlier, because when we first started to think about culture, it was probably about 2010. And we had just been doing a few strategies at that point. And I think the main concern was that people would interpret the safe system in different ways, and we'd end up with, 43 different versions of them to reflect the number of police forces in the country. But I think the more strategies that we've done, the more actually the institutional setups of the organizations involved in strategy delivery, involved in safe system implementation, the way that they operate, the way that they work collectively, the way that leaders take on safe system is really influential. And I think we've seen all sorts of different dysfunctions where we've got leaders who don't believe in safe system, or those at practitioner level who don't have the right resources or the right knowledge. And I think it's just the fact that it hasn't pervaded across organizations so that they are 100% living and breathing safe system. And that in itself has kind of led to implementation being really, really difficult, because you can understand the theory, but if you're not understanding how it relates to you and your job, how are you going to go and do it?
So I think one of the things that gives rise to is sort of question about is it like why culture versus is it just a resource issue? And I guess what I was thinking as you were talking there is I've heard a number of leaders within organizations for whom road safety is a responsibility and tend to ask questions like, what's the one thing that I should be doing, or what should my three priorities be over, the next year, or that sort of thing, which is telling in itself. I mean, if you're asking that kind of question, but it sort of seems to intimate that they think the answer is a resource issue. If only I could sort of pull that lever, I would be able to get this whole safe system thing working. But it sounds, from the way you're describing it, it's more than that. It's something that is more pervasive in terms of that cultural question.
Definitely. So I think, I mean, I can think of one example of an area which was probably a forerunner of safe system adoption. They were doing some really great things, but actually, and they had resource, and actually they've still got resource, but it all hinged around kind of the drive of one individual. It was based on their knowledge, it was based on their passion, and others were kind of being dragged along with them. And when that individual left, actually the impetus left. And I think that it means it's not resource, it's not necessarily money. It's about this has to be lived and breathed by everybody. It can't sit on the shoulders of one individual. And if we think about organizational culture in a variety of different ways, actually, surely, it's not, that's not unique to safe system, is it? It's identical to health and safety. The ladders don't get put in the right place if it's not something that's thought about by everybody all of the time. And so I think that's where we're at with it. It isn't necessarily knowledge, it's not necessarily resource. It's about believing in this thing and owning it.
Yeah, I mean, like one of my favorite quotes of all time is Peter Drucker's "The Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast." I used that in a talk once, and somebody sat on the front row went, I don't get it. But I think, so the extended quote is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, operational excellence for lunch, and everything else for dinner, or something like that. And the point that Drucker was making is actually it's not just about the resources that you've got. You can have great processes in place. Oh, that's your operational excellence bit. But if you haven't worked on developing the culture, then actually, what are people really working towards? I saw a fantastic quote actually from Antoine Saint-Exupéry the other day, who is reported to have said, if you want men to build boats, don't teach them the skills of carpentry. Develop in them a longing thirst for the open seas, or something like that. I mean, it was a great quote. But I think it's something about that, isn't it? It's something about ensuring that what we're trying to work in our organizations is that ambition, that mission, purpose orientation for what we are trying to do, which you then build on by all of the stuff like the operational excellence, the practice, the process, and those sorts of things, in order to then deliver on that ambition. But if you're not working on the mission and purpose at the heart of it, you're not working on that cultural piece, then you're not going to invest in the right areas. Right. Well, look, I think it'd be useful if we just sort of pause us chit-chatting there at that point, and start to dig into a little bit of some of the work that we've done. So there's a number of projects that we're going to talk about a little bit over the course of this hour that we've got together, and they all sort of build on one another. So Tanya, why don't you take it away in terms of sort of an exploration of how we sought to develop a safe system in the first place, and I'll launch the slides, try and get us to an appropriate point.
Brilliant. So we were commissioned to really start exploring this, and I think it's almost taken a life of its own as it's developed. But we were asked whether or not we could measure readiness for adopting the safe system in the same kind of ways that health and safety maturity is measured. And so what we have built here is a safe system cultural maturity model. So if we go on to the next slide, Dan. I'd just like to pick apart kind of the components of the model, because there are various elements that we've brought together in order to be able to kind of measure that maturity. So we started off with the safe system literature. And if we click onto the next slide, really what we wanted to do here is understand, according to best practice, in all the different international guidance around the world. Oh, Tony Crook says he can't see any slides. I can see them. Are they working for other people?
Can I get a few thumbs up if people are managing to see them? Yeah, I've got some thumbs up around, so loads of thumbs. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, Tony, what's going on there. It might be that it catches up. Had this in a team call the other day where all of a sudden it sort of kicked in. But I think we're going to carry on. If you need to sort of leave the call and come back, give that a try. Steve will make sure you navigate through the lobby. But yeah, Tanya, why don't you crack on?
Yeah. Okay. So really what we wanted to do is understand what would mature look like in terms of delivering safe system. So there are an awful lot of different guidance documents out there. These are the ones that we reviewed, 16 different manuals. Many of them should hopefully be familiar to you. And what we did was we went through and we synthesized the different safe system actions that they cited. There were over 100 in there, and we decided that there were 48 which were most frequently cited. We then held a workshop with some UK road safety experts to really understand, well, do these apply to the UK? And these were all taken forward within our model. So we're kind of looking here at the what. What we also did then, if we pop onto the next slide, please, Dan, is start to think about, well, what actions, what mechanisms of change are required in order to be able to deliver these particular actions. So we looked at 4 well-known safe system models, the PACT UK one from Australia, New Zealand and Canada. And we synthesized the words in the outside of these models. They all have these words, and sometimes I think they got a little bit forgotten at times. So what we did, we brought those together and created our own set of categories, which are shown in the diagram here. And then what we did was we assigned the actions to each of these different categories. So is it a standards action or is it a compliance action? So we could understand how they all belonged to a different change mechanism, a way of delivering on the safe system. So at that point, we've kind of got an idea of what we should be doing. But what we really wanted to do is identify how we could measure maturity. So in order to do this, we looked at other cultural maturity literature. There are a variety of different models which are used in health and safety, in academia, and a variety of different domains. And we actually went through and we found 11 different cultural maturity models. They've been used in occupational health, coal mining, gas, all sorts of different areas. And the one model that came up most frequently was Hudson and Parker's Hearts and Minds model, which is this one here. And it's about moving up kind of a ladder of maturity from pathological to generative. So what we've got here is that the pathological stage, really, if this was applied to health and safety, as long as we don't get caught, we really don't care about health and safety. And then we can move further and further up as an organisation in the way that we deliver, say, health and safety, until we're generative. This is what we do. This is our business, is safety. It's how we operate. So our beliefs and our values and our motivations are all linked, across our organisation. We all believe in this stuff and we all do it together. So we took that and we thought, well, how might that apply to the safe system? So if we pop on to the next one, actually aligned really well. So we've got kind of what we've classed vulnerable, and we'll come on to why we haven't quite mirrored the Hearts and Minds model labels in a moment. But right at the bottom, actually, no culture of caring for road safety. we don't believe in safe system, we don't have a safe system vision. Road safety is kind of at the bottom of the pile. At the emerging stage, well, we're starting to have a safe system strategy and vision in place, but actually we're still responding reactively. We're finding locations where there have been crashes and we're then responding. We're not thinking about how do we proactively remove risk from our road network. We then get to the developing stage where the ideas are a bit more formed and it's actually being communicated to stakeholders, but it's still not the thing that is being lived and breathed by everybody. It's a bit of a burden. Organizations who are maturing, everybody on the same page, all of the stakeholders and partners are working to actively try to understand what works within the safe system. And then we've got advanced, and this is where it really is something that's embedded within government, across organizations. It's advocated for. It's no longer just kind of a thing that sits in a department of the Department for Transport in an area, small area of road safety. Actually, it's at the core of everything that's done, and people understand why it's so important, and it's just something that we think about all the time. So this is the stages of maturity that we've developed within the model. The next thing we really felt was actually this requires a bit of behavior change within the sector. If we're going to move from perhaps being quite reactive in the way that we deliver road safety to being more proactive, to thinking about how we get other stakeholders involved in delivering safe system, we probably need a bit of behavior change. So this is where we thought about which models might be applicable. And we came up with the ISM model. Well, we didn't. In fact, it was one developed by the Scottish Government. And it's really about how people's behaviour is influenced by 3 different contexts. So we've got the individual at the heart of it, the social, and then around that, the material. So the individual is all about the kind of the values and the beliefs, attitudes, skills, emotions, habits, the cost benefits and the agency that they have. The people within the organisation, what do they think? How do they behave? And what's kind of influencing them? We've then got the social, because obviously an organisation is a social being. We've got the norms within that organisation. How does it react? How does it act? So what roles are in place? What relationships are there in that social context which might influence the way in which people behave? And then the outside, I mean, as we talked about right at the beginning here, and resource, we still do need resources available to us in order to be able to deliver. So we need to have the infrastructure in place. We need to have technologies. We need to have rules and regulations, and also the time and the schedule to do the right thing. So with all of these different ingredients, we felt that we could start to understand how we could help organisations to become more mature in terms of safe system adoption. So this is how we created the safe system cultural maturity model. What we did was brought together those actions from the international literature, combined it with the hearts and minds model, and then the ISM model. And this is what we end up with here. So right at the core, we have those influences on the individuals within an organisation. So their beliefs, their attitudes, values, and rules. And then we've got how are those applied? Well, what roles do we have within an organisation? What's the language that's used about safe system? What customs and symbols do we have? And then in the outside, we have the operation, those change mechanisms that came from safe system. This is how we deliver safe system. So we need all of these different elements of design and engineering through to leadership and coordination. And bringing all of these together allows us to really understand how a safe system maturity can be measured.
So I wonder whether it's just before we move on, Tanya, worth sort of pausing on this. And obviously, there's elements of this model that sort of map fairly directly onto some of the constituent models, i.e. the ISM model, or some of those safe system models that we've then kind of refined and shaped to get them ready for this. But I think one of the things that we probably don't spend very much time talking about is the interrelationship between them. So when you're explaining the ISM model, the individual is seen as this kind of almost sort of impervious set of beliefs, values, attitudes, whereas in the construct element of the model here, it is porous. I mean, there is this influence that that construction element has on the other parts of the model outside it, but actually that influence is also sort of being felt internally within the individual. I don't know whether you want to sort of tease that one out a little bit more, or maybe sort of kick this one around a bit. But so it's not just ISM model, but with safe system added on it. Actually, it is thinking about those principles that underpin those other models and how they get worked out in an organizational context of safe system.
I mean, yeah, so the way I see it, it's very much two-way, isn't it? So that, we can have really positive beliefs and attitudes towards safe system engineering, for example. But if the standards and training are not equipping people to be able to deliver safe system, then we're going to have frustrations and we're not going to be able to implement. And similarly, the other way around, that actually the leadership and coordination roles are going to influence the values of those within the organization. It's going to, do they have safe system culture champions within an organization? If you've got those roles, then that's probably an indication of a mature leadership in terms of safe system, and that in turn is going to influence the beliefs and the values. So it's very much two-way, and I think they can't be distinct, because if they are, we're going to get those pockets of practitioners perhaps being more mature than their leaders, or vice versa, because all of those operations are about equipping, aren't they, and enabling those within the organization to deliver.
Yeah, I guess actually, as you were explaining that, I was thinking about alignment between some of those elements at the three levels. So if you've got a belief that, I don't know, say threat appeal is an effective means of influencing the behavior of citizens to adhere to road traffic rules, if that's your core belief, and actually that pervades the organization, so the organization ends up saying, yes, we really must sort of develop campaigns and symbology and language that communicates that, and we will invest in roles that do that, then what we'll end up with is a bias towards the education communication aspects of our delivery that is directly related to that conviction, that belief, that actually we can make the change by delivering campaigns of that kind. And that's where it's crucial for this to be informed by other aspects of the model, so that actually we've got good quality data and evidence that's actually helping to channel into those values and those beliefs.
Definitely.
That was a pause. That was an invitation for you to
Well,
reflect
no,
or go
I was
further.
nodding away because I completely agree. But actually, I think the other element of it that perhaps we haven't talked about here, and we probably will come on to at the moment, is almost the sphere of influence across the safe system as well. So if you have an organization who doesn't believe they've got a role in, say, safe vehicles, then all of these operations, all of these roles, the application and construction, we may get a shrugging of shoulder. Well, that's not for us to be involved in. That obviously also influences the culture, because if there isn't a role in safe vehicles, then how does that change the dynamics and your responsibilities over safe roads or safe road users if you're not accepting your role in the whole of the system?
Yes, and that's where that roles element, that application of the culture becomes so critical, because if you go, well, actually we're a highway authority, the only thing that we can really deal with is the infrastructure, then you won't necessarily invest in roles that address those other parts of the system. Whereas actually, if you say, do you know what, we've got, I don't know, 2 million vehicles that use our network on a daily basis or whatever, like we therefore need to have a view on what's happening with the vehicle fleet. And this is what London have done. They've basically gone, look, actually there are things that we can do from a vehicle perspective. So things like the direct vision standard, things like implementation of ISA across their own fleet, the bus safety standard, they are ostensibly a highway authority, but they're also a regulatory body, and therefore there are things that they can do to influence that. And I think, we need to engage much more around how those roles that are not the traditional roles of an enforcement authority or a road authority or whatever actually need to be much more broadened out to embrace a much more holistic view of the safe system. And again, it's one of the reasons why culture really matters, because if you haven't got leaders that think there's value in that, then you're not going to invest in those roles. Great. Well, let's take that forward a little bit, because having developed this model, and hopefully just even in the sort of the discussion that we've had there, you see the applicability of it. One of the things that we then wanted to understand is, can this model be used to understand and evaluate the current state of maturity within an organization? So we needed to go on to find out whether we could develop metrics from the model that would allow us to measure the performance of an organization and understand their current state of readiness. So to move from that sort of theoretical development to some quantitative data that would help to elucidate the current states of maturity. So what we did then is we developed a question set. And the idea was that, having found those sort of 48 high priority interventions in the safe system literature, and having looked at the cultural maturity literature, we wanted to be able to, in as few questions as possible, get enough insight about where an organization and people within an organization felt that they were at, to understand their alignment with the imperatives of the safe system, i.e. the principles that that no one should be killed or seriously injured on our network, that there's shared responsibility about how we deliver the safety of that network, that humans are vulnerable to injury and that they are prone to making mistakes, that we need to deal with that systemically and proactively. So we needed to ensure that that we wanted to try and reflect the breadth of road safety delivery across the components, so safe vehicles, safe road users, post-crash, safe speeds, etc. To reflect those priority actions that we'd identified from the literature, and the change mechanisms that we also know and understand are there within those sort of operators. So that was quite a big challenge, actually, to come up with a question architecture that would allow us to reflect enough of all of those components to have some confidence that we were providing a reasonable measure of maturity within an organization. But it wasn't just that we were trying to do. We were also trying to develop a question set that would not only diagnose existing levels of maturity, but something that would have validity for comparison between different organizations. So if you ran the same question set with two different organizations who have responsibility for road safety, that there would be comparability of results. So you might be able to see how they scored differently between organizations. We wanted it to be transformative because we wanted to highlight the areas of the safe system where people might need to improve, and therefore, we wanted to develop a scoring system that would facilitate organizations seeing how they could make changes. And we also wanted it to be something that you could come back to again and again over time, and therefore be evaluative to see how an organization was making progress over time. So what we ended up developing was a question set that looks a little bit like the example that's on the screen. We came up with 22 questions that move people from vulnerable to advanced, that focused on those eight mechanisms of change. It says here 6 safe system components, because we actually included some questions that were actually about the kind of road safety management system more generally, than just the other components. And between them, they actually ticked off 33 of those 48 safe system actions that we talked about. So to give you an example, there's one on the screen under the road safety management component of the system, tagged on the change mechanism or the operator of leadership and coordination. The question was, how does the safe system impact on the actions of the organization? So that's quite broad. But then you've got these 5 different descriptions of what the system, what the organization's performance might look like. And as people answer those questions, we start to build up then a view of whether they are vulnerable, emerging, developing, maturing, or indeed advanced. And when you do that across a wide number of participants within an organization, then you start to get some normalization of that data. Because if you just go and ask those questions of an expert, they might go, oh yeah, we're really advanced in all of these things. But when you start to ask them across a broad cohort within an organization, some of them will go, I have no idea what we do on these things. And you can begin to build up a picture of the degree to which that safe system culture has pervaded the organization, and can then score the organization from a reasonably broad set of results. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what that might then start to look like. So here's a spider diagram that breaks down those questions according to the safe system components that they scored in. And for disclosure, this was a set of results that we did with our team. And that includes everyone in finance, administration, sales and marketing, versus those who are actively working on road safety delivery stuff. And so you see that you can develop a score for each of those safe system components, some where actually it's seemingly much higher, much more robust than others. And just to show you, oh yeah, the other one of the other things that we've done with this now is we've started to build out some like a pro forma. So a bit like, I don't know, if you do a Myers-Briggs typology test on the internet and you discover that you're an INTJ, well, at least I am anyway, then it tells you, oh, well, these are some of your likely characteristics. These are some of the things that you might want to work on. The idea is that it indicates those sort of strengths and weaknesses and where you might need to invest. And it also breaks down those scores between change mechanisms. So again, I mean, if you're working in a partnership context, you could look at this across organizations and see how the strengths and weaknesses of different organizations might offset similar strengths and weaknesses in others. And collectively, what you really want is to be able to have that cumulative strength across delivery of the safe system more widely. So through a couple of those projects, we wrote up those findings, and Tanya, over to you to tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So yeah, we're really pleased to have got 2 journal articles from this work. So the first one in the Journal of Road Safety is specifically about how we've created the model, everything that we've just spoken about there, how we built it and how we've tested it. I think the second one is really interesting, the Stipdonk et al. With the traffic safety research. We're not the only ones who are thinking about safe system maturity. I think several organizations now have come to a very similar kind of conclusion that if we've got vision 0 as the target, how do we know that we're getting there? And we can have safety performance indicators, we can have interim casualty targets, but actually understanding where we should be doing more in terms of safe system delivery is actually quite difficult from the outside. And so this joint paper was a comparison of 3 maturity models, which seem to sit quite nicely side by side, actually. So we've got us looking at culture. We have the ITF, who have produced a maturity model which can be used for projects right the way through to countries, very much targeting LMIC's but is applicable elsewhere, which is understanding the actions that are being delivered at different levels of maturity. And then also the Asian Development Bank, who have looked at maturity through management systems. And I think what's really interesting about the traffic safety research paper is how those three models can kind of sit side by side and allow us to measure maturity in road safety from different approaches, so that we can all kind of understand, well, where should we be putting the greatest effort?
Great stuff. So the links on those slides, assuming that you're using full Teams, should link directly to those papers for you. They are open publications, so there's no paywalls or anything for you to have to go through, which is quite nice. I wonder, Steve, whether it might just be worth dropping those links into the chat as well, in case anyone hasn't got is viewing in the browser and those links don't work, etc. Great. So yeah, so basically we've kind of looked through a little bit of the some of the key questions and challenges that we were starting to explore, some of the work that we've done to develop the model and to find whether it can be tested, measured, and the validation of those journal articles, and which are peer reviewed, seems to indicate that we've been able to do that. What we then want to sort of spend a little bit of time talking about is the so what. I mean, what do you do when you've measured that? Do feel free. I said this right at the start. You're all being either we're sort of wonderfully interesting or something, or so dull that you haven't started to add anything to the chat or questions. So please do. If you've got questions, start to lob them in, because in another few minutes we're going to get to a sort of Q&A time. So great to be able to feed on questions that you guys have got. But where I wanted to go now is some work that we've recently been developing with Scotland. This is really only a little bit of a trailer for some stuff that we're going to develop further later in the autumn. On the 24th of October, we're going to be running another webinar, which is a bit of a sort of part 2 to this. We'll rehearse some of the content from today, but we'll really talk about that kind of question of what next. And George Henry, who's the head of road safety policy at Transport Scotland, is going to join us for that. But basically, Scotland, back in 2021, they launched their road safety framework to 2030 and set themselves this ambition of having the world's safest roads, all orientated around the safe system, but getting a couple of years into that, and with a decent performance management framework underpinning it, recognizing that actually there's a need to build capacity around safe system delivery. And so we ended up talking with them about this culture aspect in particular. I mean, there's other things going on there to do with data management and training, etc. But saying actually there's this issue of culture that people are starting to grapple with. Let's take a look at that, and let's seek to measure across Transport Scotland and some partner organisations how that current level of maturity stacks up. So from that analytical work and identifying some of the sort of strengths and weaknesses, what we've then gone on to do is to develop this cultural maturity playbook. So I'm just going to explain a little bit of the sort of the model that sits at the heart of it and how we've developed it, and then later on in the year, as I say, we'll talk a bit more about some of the case studies and action areas that it identifies you might want to engage with. So in response to this issue of how you transform culture, it's got a very simple model at the heart of it, an ABCD model. So those are advocacy, behavior, communication, and design. So they are reflective of particularly that sort of application element of the safe system cultural maturity model that we showed before. They are four priority areas for you to have to invest in if you want to work on culture. And so the advocacy bit is basically about actively championing the cultural ambitions that we've got. So saying we want to be a safe system organization and really laying out what that starts to look like and ensuring that that advocacy is happening at a variety of levels within the organization. Behavior is about embedding the customs and practices that express our desired outcome, our desired culture. So, what does good look like in terms of a safe system culture? It's basically getting the right people in the right places doing the right things. So, what do those behaviors look like? How do we communicate effectively? So making sure that, again, going back to the cultural maturity model, we talked in that about language and symbols. So, this is the kind of the language bit. Have we got the shared vocabulary that clarifies our purpose? And then the design bit, how do we reinforce that? How do we use the symbols and images to reinforce the kind of culture that we are looking for? And then around that, what we've done is we've created these 12 sort of domains of activity. So mission, roles, professional development are being aspects of the advocacy piece, performance management process and practice being aspects of the behavior piece. And then each of those breaks down into a number of kind of more discrete actions that you can take forward within an organization to help to try and transform that culture and move up those stages of maturity. And just to sort of, this is just a little bit to sort of show some of our workings out, because it all needs to align to that question set and those measurements that we've said are so critical in terms of evaluating where an organization currently is. So what we've done is all of the questions are aligned to those elements of the model, or rather the model aligns to those questions that we're asking. So within the question set that we've already developed, there are questions that explore the beliefs, attitudes, values and rules that are guiding the organization. There are other questions that are actually elucidating the customs and roles within an organization. And when you sort of scale that up across the playbook that we've developed, actually you can see multiple intervention types that you could introduce in a variety of places throughout the organization that help you to develop that mission focus, which is part of the advocacy element of building your culture. And then all of that kind of goes into then the construction of the playbook in terms of exploring the behavioral principles that underpin what we're trying to do based on evidence, aligned to behavior change, and crucially sort of illustrated with a whole variety of case studies. I mean, there's 40 odd case studies in there, some of them from road safety, many of them actually taken from other sectors and other businesses. So in this case, this is 3M's innovation culture, which I guess a number of people have heard of, where they invest 15% of all staff time on exploratory innovation. So you get to work with colleagues from across the business in order to ensure that people understand the breadth of what the organization does. But they also seek to develop a significant proportion of their revenues off invention that's only come within the last 3 years. So again, what they're trying to develop is this very innovative culture, but it starts to help sort of shine a light on ways in which we could develop our culture more proactively by thinking differently about the way that we utilize time or the way that we encourage people to engage with colleagues, etc. Right, I'm going to just stop sharing the presentation there. There's a last slide that we want to finish on shortly, but be good just to start to take some questions. So I don't know, Tanya, whether you feel like you could take on the ISO 39001 question or not. I mean, that's
no, but really intrigued by the idea of thinking how it might map. Yeah, I can't answer it now, I don't think, but it's something I'm going to go away and have some thinking about.
Yeah, I think it's a really good provocation. And actually, I think some of the ISO certification is often undervalued in terms of the cultural impact that it can have. And I know that, when we as an organization decided to go for ISO 9001 and ISO, or what is now 45001 years ago, it felt like it was a tick box exercise, because it felt like it was, in order to win public sector contracts, we need to have those ISO standards in place. But over time, when you start to engage with the processes that those certification systems then inflict on you as a business, you can approach it in one of two ways. You can either do it that it is a tick box exercise, and as long as we can tick the boxes, then it's done, isn't it? I have to say, my view as a director, chair of various boards and that sort of thing, I see it as a valuable sort of transformation mechanism, actually, to say what does good look like, and what kind of organization do we want to be, and can we use that certification process to embed the right behaviors in our organization. And I think ISO 39001 on its own might not be enough to make that move. I think ISO 39001 as part of a broader cultural development program actually could be really good, because it is aligned to safe system, and I think could have real value. So great question, Julian. Thanks for that. Yeah, but you have definitely set some further thoughts going as well, I'm sure. Oh, here we go, Tanya. There's one on targets. That's definitely a you question.
That's definitely okay. Yeah, just running through. So yeah, Brendan asks, what's our view on setting Vision Zero type hard targets, so no fatalities by a certain date, and how does this relate to cultural maturity behavior change? So absolutely, on all of the strategies that we're working with, we tend to call them goals or ambitions, and I think, seeing your second part of your question, it has to be realistic. We know we cannot achieve Vision Zero tomorrow, and therefore we don't want to set agencies up to fail. So we need to be ambitious. I think setting interim casualty reduction targets is really useful. There's an awful lot of evidence that suggests that having targets mobilizes organizations. It helps to communicate to the public that we're serious about road safety. Aligning those with safety performance indicators is also really important, so we can understand where in the system things are becoming safer, and it's not just that casualty reduction element of it, because obviously that in itself is a lag indicator, and we have to wait for people to be injured in order to understand the progress. So I think communicating Vision Zero as a goal, as an aspiration, as something that you're absolutely dedicated to. We're not going to pack up shop when we get to 3, because that's not zero. But I think it is about being realistic about the journey there.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would add to that, I really like the kind of backcasting approach. So you determine where you are trying to get to, and then you work out what the steps that you need to take to get there are. And inevitably, actually, in pretty much any backcasting exercise, you'll end up with an innovation gap. So you say we want to get to 0 fatalities for, in this case, the UK by 2050. Like, what's it going to take to get there? What interventions have we got in the toolbox now that we can leverage, and what's the innovation gap that's going to enable us to get there? So I think, the still setting the aspiration for 0 creates the impetus, but it also helps us to identify what we haven't yet developed in terms of response. I mean, if Portland, Oregon can deliver 0 by 2025, then I think we'll all be on a plane out to Portland, because it's quite a cool city anyway, isn't it, right? To go and see how they've done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'm just going to bring in Nick Cowling's comment. Hopefully our new government will light the spark and bring in a road safety delivery culture back. I guess there's a couple of things to sort of say in response to that, Nick. I mean, yes, I think most of us working in this sector feel somewhat enthused by a change of government, and hopefully a change of tone. I note that yesterday Sir Peter Hendy was appointed as Minister of State in the Department for Transport. So it looks like Michael Gove's assertion that we've had enough of experts has finally come to an end. Peter Hendy is somebody with nearly 50 years of deep transport experience at Network Rail, organising transport for the London Olympics in 2012 at Transport for London, and is now going to be a key part of that ministerial team. But I think one of the other things that would really like to see in terms of that culture piece is I think we have undervalued the effect that the kind of public discourse has on our expectations. So whilst we've had this whole sort of language around the plan for drivers and not allowing policy measures that seem to impinge on people's freedom in their lives, then actually it has prevented us from pursuing policy measures that, yes, they might have a slight impact in terms of curtailing an element of public freedom, but actually they deliver far, far better social outcomes. So all of the pushback against 20-mile-an-hour limits, when now we're starting to see quite clear evidence coming through that they are having a significant impact in terms of, we're starting to see reductions in casualties, more livable environments for people. Evidence from France about their speed limit reductions on large parts of their rural network, which is literally saving hundreds of lives and serious injuries per annum. Like these things matter, and the kind of public discourse that's happening really matters in terms of whether you can advance those public policy measures. And I think that's a key part of culture, and it feeds into that construction element of the safe system cultural maturity piece, whether we believe that a thing is achievable, is doable, is valuable, is a key component.
And I think that's come up a couple of times. So both Julian and Yuri have mentioned communication there of how do we, I suppose it's a key part of the shared responsibility element of it, isn't it? But let's not be apologetic for wanting to eliminate road death. We wouldn't allow it in any other field, would we? We don't send our children to school in the hope that they come home from a classroom because it could be unsafe. Why are we allowing that? And I think it's, that public discourse is a really important part of a mature safe system culture, isn't it? Is that, we're going to say it's not tolerated anymore.
Yeah, Julian, no need to apologise for being ranty about Welsh limits. I just indulged myself, so you're in good company. Let me just take Stuart's comment in the chat. So being against zero targets because you'll always get idiots. I totally understand that, Stuart. And I think, as Tanya's already sort of intimated in the answers that she's given, like zero, by zero, do we literally mean zero? And will we go to any expense to eradicate all possibility of any fatalities from the network ever? Or actually the safe system recognizes that humans make mistakes. That's different from humans acting
like idiots
to affect self-harm. I mean, and I think where the Vision Zero philosophy developed in Sweden was a recognition that what we have largely done historically within road safety is basically blame the road user for their mistakes. And if only they would behave better, then we would have a better state of affairs. And it devolved all responsibility to the user, and it basically gave free rein to the road authorities and enforcement authorities, etc. The policy innovation of Vision Zero is that this idea of shared responsibility, that we as legislators, regulators, standard setters, trainers, engineers, designers have a responsibility for the kind of network that we devise, the kinds of vehicles that we allow to go on it, and the kinds of users that we facilitate to have access to those kinds of vehicles. That puts a huge amount of responsibility on the system operators to do the things that they can. And some of that allows us to take away some of the stupidity. So if you've got alcohol interlocks on vehicles, it's a technology intervention. It works in many countries. It's already on large parts of the public service vehicle fleet. Like, you remove the opportunity for people to get behind a wheel whilst drunk. So there are things that you can do within the system that allow you to remove the stupidity or the idiocy, whichever word you used, I can't remember. And I think the other thing is that, just as Tanya's just elucidated there, it's about the ambition. Are we ambitious for a network that, well, it has a kind of acceptable level of fatality on it, doesn't it? Or are we ambitious for a network that's capable of delivering zero? And so, yeah, actually, when we do training around safe system, we explore all of these kinds of challenges to Vision Zero as a concept, and some of them are, quite tricky to engage with. And I think, we are reasonably sort of pragmatic in the approach, in the sense that, look, zero may not mean that we never ever, I mean, a bit like the airline industry. It's not that there are never ever any deaths in the airline industry, but quite frankly, they've developed a management system towards safety that means that unless something really unusual or happens, or somebody behaves in a really reckless manner, actually that system is capable of delivering zero. Have we got any other questions?
Oh, Martin. Hopefully the new government will relaunch the terribly communicated changes to the highway code, i.e. the hierarchy of road users. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We do need to communicate that. It is a really good safe system way of thinking, and allows us to communicate that shared responsibility and think about the different levers we've got in order to protect those most vulnerable, because it's not just behavior, as it is about road design, it's about speed limit setting, it's about vehicle technologies that help us to protect other people. It's a really good opportunity to start thinking about the culture of our country in terms of road safety.
Cool. Right. I've just realised that we are basically out of time. Carl,
And so
where's
we
that
really need to find that
gone?
last slide. Yeah.
So I have just found the last slide,
Great.
and hopefully it will be sharing on your screens now, because as many of you will be aware, over the last couple of years, we have run a safe system survey each summer, and really trying to help understand the current capacity in the system to deliver a safe system. So looking at the capacity of organizations, what's happening with their budgets, what's happening with their staffing, whether they feel like they've got the skills and capabilities to deliver on safe system. What we're doing this year is we're changing the question set slightly, in order to ask these questions about cultural maturity. So please do go to agilicis.co.uk/survey, and that will take you to the Safe System survey for this year, and allow you to participate in that survey, and to give us basically to help us understand what the state of readiness is across the country at the present time in terms of safe system capability and culture. And so with that, I think we're at the end of our time together. So anything else you want to add, Tanya, or
I
are
just
we
think
about done?
on the survey, please share with colleagues, as we said right at the beginning, with this cultural maturity, it's not about hearing one person's voice, because hopefully you're all very passionate about it, and that's why you're here today. But actually, let's hear from your colleagues, because understanding how mature we all are and how passionate about safe system we are across all of different organisations is really, really important. Yeah, we don't really want to just hear from one individual for this one. So yeah, please share widely, and yeah, we look forward to sharing the results later in the year.
Great stuff. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for your time and participation this afternoon. Hopefully that's been a valuable session to you, and we look forward to crossing paths very soon. But for now, stay safe out there and see you later.